Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. Welcome to the Demonstrating Implementation Excellence stream here at the SNOMED CT Expo 2023. My name is Susie Roy. I'm the Customer Relations Manager for the Americas, Collaboration Specialist, and Research Engagement Lead here at SNOMED International. All questions will be answered today at the conclusion of Shaun's presentation. Online attendees, please note that you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and all of these questions will be guided to the presenter at the end of his presentation as well. On-site employees, there is a microphone, in the center of the room, so at the time of Q&A, you can queue up over there and we will go through your questions as well. So I'm now pleased to introduce Shaun Shakib from the Clinical Architecture, who will be presenting Implementing SNOMED CT in Nationally Notified Diseases Reporting the Pathogen Surveillance. Go ahead.
Thanks, Susie. All right, so I'm Shaun Shakib. I'm the Chief Informatics Officer with Clinical Architecture. I'm also Assistant Adjunct Professor in Biomedical Informatics at the University of Utah and Indiana University. This work was done in collaboration with lots of other folks. The reverbs make me feel a little godlike. Does this sound good out there? Can you guys hear me? I just want to give credit to those folks. I have a slide at the end where we'll discuss that, but I just want to point out that a lot of people are involved in this. A lot of people that were involved in this are also in the room, so feel free to chime in with any comments as I'm going through the presentation. And at full disclosure, I'm a nervous speaker, so if I start going too fast or I throw out an occasional non sequitur, just give me a quizzical look and I'll try to slow down or restate. All right, so this slide is an eye chart. You probably don't need to focus too much on this. What I just want to introduce are the three initiatives that I'm going to talk about today. The first initiative is ELR for NND, so ELR reporting for nationally notifiable diseases, and how SNOMED was used in that project. That sort of net new use of SNOMED to, in the sense that it was used to standardize inbound data. The next initiative is work with the Association of Public Health Labs lab result terminology, or PLR. So this is a terminology that's been out for quite a while. It was used to populate OBX5 and HL7 messages. And it was meant to address, concepts that were not yet present in SNOMED. And that group was diligent about submitting those concepts to SNOMED. But that terminology was a standalone terminology, and this work involved taking that terminology and turning it into a SNOMED extension, or transforming it into a SNOMED extension. The last initiative is work that's underway with CDC on the pathogen code set. So that's a terminology, again, a standalone terminology that is used to report healthcare-associated infections. Basically, it's a list of pathogen concepts, those, it was essentially a spreadsheet where you'd go and find the pathogen and then you'd enter it when you were doing your reporting. That work involved converting that to a SNOMED value set with extended attributes, and I want to walk through that as well. So let's start with the ELR for NND. Okay, so basically, during the pandemic, we were, messages started to do uplift of inbound HL7 messages to be 251 ELR compliant messages. The routing of those messages was through the ELR intelligent routing services. So this is something that's hosted by APHL and the AIMS platform. And working together with Datapult, we took on a project to build a flow for those messages. It took inbound HL7, uplifted it 2.x, uplifted it to ELR compliant 251 messages, and then applied first some filtering logic to identify messages that might contain NNDs, and then customized the reporting and detection rules to send those NNDs on to jurisdictions. I'm going to talk about that more here in these upcoming slides. So again, the steps here were, first, inbound, ingest inbound 2.x messages. Mapping was done, right? So if what was coming in were local codes, and validation was done. So if standard codes were sent through, we'd identify those, confirm that that was a valid inbound standard code. And that involved terminologies beyond SNOMED. And then in the next phase, so sort of mapping of inbound concepts, then structural uplift, right? So changing the syntax of the messages to be 251 compliant. SNOMED had a role there. And then detection of NNDs, that was done using mostly LOINC, and I'll talk about that more. And then we assessed those messages using jurisdiction-specific rules, and I'll give some examples of those. So again, I'm just sort of highlighting the two steps in the process where SNOMED had a role. So the mapping and standardization and in the rules. All right, so the value sets used in the rules, these are just some statistics on those value sets. So there's 769 value sets used in these NND reporting and detection rules. 628 were derived from standard, RCKMS, CST value sets. And 141 were custom value sets. And by that, the jurisdiction was basically saying, and I'll give examples, but we no longer require that you report COVID, for example. And that wouldn't be true for every jurisdiction. So it's something that was not, diverged from what the national reporting requirements were. And that required, new value sets in many cases, both in the detection and in the reporting criteria. So of those value sets, SNOMED is used in 140, LOINC is used in 626, and HL7 observation interpretation is used in 3 of those value sets. The expansion of those value sets resulted in 20, well, currently, I don't know if that number's always changing, obviously, but 21,863 concepts. Of those, 10,915 are SNOMED, 10,931 LOINC, and 17 were HL7 observation interpretation. All right, so now this is some detail on those value sets. So SNOMED is used on the lab result part of this message, right? So basically there's 2 areas of focus. OBX3, so where you identify the lab test, and OBX5 where the result is showing up. SNOMED, the types of I won't say flavors, but the types of value sets are nominal indications of presence, ordinal indications of presence, organisms, and specimen sources. And later here, when we talk about some of those customizations that were done for jurisdiction, I'm going to talk about how specimens come into play. So those are the types of value sets that were created and are being maintained. The examples of the jurisdiction-specific customizations, and I think when you're in the standard space, you never like to hear that, right? This is how this is. There are the additions of reportable conditions. So one jurisdiction voluntarily reports babesiosis and Candida auris, right? So that's an addition to the national requirements. So those concepts had to be added to the value sets for that jurisdiction. Removable of reportable conditions. So many jurisdictions, as I mentioned earlier, many jurisdictions no longer report COVID-19. And this is a case where the jurisdiction really does not want to see those records, right? They don't want them reported. Changes to reportable criteria. So this was an example where the original interpretation from the jurisdiction was all VZV testing, antibody, antigen, culture positive results should be reported. But the refinement was that it was only for lab tests that where the specimen was CSF, right? So this is where it gets more interesting, right? Because CSF as a concept can be pre-coordinated into the LOINC code and come in OBX3, or it can show up in a specimen field separately. So the value sets had to be modified or adjusted or customized to detect the specimen CSF if it came in OBX3 or it came in specimen field, and then apply that rule for reporting. And then the last is customization of jurisdiction-specific value sets. And that's, in this example, one jurisdiction wanted to use their own value set for Canada. And I'm going fast enough that and I know we said save questions till the end, but I'm happy to, it actually makes me more comfortable if I get questions as I go. So if there's any really obvious things, feel free to just kind of raise your hand or ask me as I'm going through. All right, so this next initiative is the example that I spoke of where there was a legacy standalone terminology that was converted into a SNOMED extension. So these are the APHL PLR codes. These are mostly organism concepts, and again, used to address content that's coming in the OBX5 of HL7 messages. An effort was undertaken, so basically this was content that some of the individuals just stepped into the room to do this work. So this was work done to create a stronger editorial policy around the maintenance of this content. So put it into a controlled medical vocabulary, but previously was in spreadsheets, and they were doing, it was a huge amount of effort to reconcile that content with SNOMED and author it, but highly manual. So the conversion involved first acquiring the namespace, then doing some initial reconciliation. So you have some terminology, SNOMED has concepts, the work had to be undertaken to sort of see, are our concepts already in SNOMED? So that was sort of a mapping effort to go through and see what's already in SNOMED. The work also entailed looking for any kind of duplicate concepts within the code system. So looking to see if there was, duplicates within PLR. And then transitioning that to the namespace. So using the namespace identifiers and turning it into an extension, basically. Then there's this ongoing life cycle for the content, right? So the first, top half of this is the conversion process. The bottom half is the ongoing data governance process. And that involves, creating a workflow for authoring the content, automating the submission of the content, so to reduce the time between concept creation and getting it submitted to SNOMED. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute. And then getting that content out where it needs to go. So making it available, publishing where it can be seen, browsed, utilized. So to give you a sense, PLR, this number, so it's around 6,600 concepts. That number is not static, right? They're actively adding new content to this code system. And the work to identify these concepts is done collaboratively between APHL and CDC. As I mentioned, first step in the reconciliation was map it to itself, and found 100 duplicate concepts, roughly 100 duplicate concepts just within the code system when the first review was done. Then there was a big effort to take all of PLR and map it to current SNOMED. And that identified 1,200 concepts that were PLR standalone concepts that were present in SNOMED. And then, and this is the sort of discussion part of this, and we might talk about this more in the question and answer portion of this, but because you notice in that data governance lifecycle, I mentioned ongoing reconciliation. And what I meant by that is that you can't, so when you built the extension, but you have to constantly evaluate your content to see if it's showing up in SNOMED. And that has something to do with the time between concept creation, submission, and then the appearance of that concept in SNOMED. So we're trying to find better ways. The first step was just to shorten the duration of time between submission of the content to SNOMED. So it's authored and it's submitted in a workflow, and I'll show that in an example. But the time from submission to it appearing in SNOMED, other submitters may have submitted content. So basically, it just requires an ongoing check to see, do I have content in my extension that's in SNOMED and got into SNOMED through another channel, or because it appeared in a reference source. All right, so this is just an idea. This is a custom workflow for the authoring of content. And keep in mind, this is not, so it's not SNOMED specific. It's for all their content, any master data that they're managing in the environment. So this was to just sort of create a single place where that content is managed, and allowed for the federated authoring of this content between APHL and CDC. Then within the same environment, submission to SNOMED. So this is to help automate that process, right? Identify the concepts in the terminology that are new, get the content into a format for submission to SNOMED, and help automate that. And then track the status of the submission. And then, as I mentioned, last step in the cycle is to make it available. So a browser that lets you browse this extension concepts. Yes.
Jim Campbell, Nebraska.
I hear you. I don't know.
Jim Campbell, Nebraska. Shaun, when you say submission to SNOMED, you're talking about the U.S. extension?
So I'm gonna, and I'm not to put you on the spot, Jamie, but Jamie's one of the authors of this content. And I believe, and Jamie, if I'll say it and then just tell me if I got it completely wrong. So there's a submission. Sometimes the submission will end up going to international, from my understanding, right?
Correct. We'll submit to the U.S. edition, and then it's up to them to decide whether or not they're going to promote it. And that's on the about the process. But it's up to them to decide if they want to advance it, and if not, we'll just keep it in the U.S.
So they'll submit it to the U.S. edition, and then SNOMED will make a decision about whether to advance that to international or keep it in the U.S. Extension. Is that good?
Can I ask what turnaround time you got on your submission to code?
That's variable, and for multiple reasons, right? So the factors that come into play are that concept appearing in the reference sources used by SNOMED. So what APHL and CDC are seeing is that these I keep doing that. These concepts are appearing out in the wild, right? They're coming through in lab messages. So they identify them, they create them immediately. And that's so that messages can flow. They'll make a submission to SNOMED, and that's what we've worked to really decrease the interval there. SNOMED appropriately has an editorial policy for those, that involves that concept appearing in reference sources. And Jim might be able to offer more clarity on what all those sources are. There are multiple, I believe. But that's just, time into the literature, time from submission is variable. So,
Shaun? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, timing.
Finish up your question, and then I have one on. No, you have plenty of time to wait. Did you have a follow-up, Jim?
Yeah, it really depends. You're asking from the time you submit to the time it's published?
Yeah, that's the longest.
Well, it just depends. I mean, if we have a release cycle of SNOMED every 6 months, if we submit one right after release in 6 months, if we can meet the deadline, we should be published within the next 6 weeks, perhaps. Initially, for the first 12 years, we did not request any of those. Very rarely, we just had our own code system, our own PLR code system. So, can you guys hear me okay, or I need a mic?
Well, we need the mic for the online.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
thank you.
So, thank you for that. So, James Patterson here with APHL. So, really, it depended. For many years, most of those were not submitted at all. And then eventually, we did get a namespace so we could submit our own numbers. But those times, just like Shaun was alluding to, it really varies whether we submit at the beginning of a cycle or the end of the cycle. But for most cases, they're published the very next time there's a release.
Yeah, and it can be a race from other submitters too, identifying this concept through other sources, not just the reference sources. So it's just, the consequence is what I was mentioning, which it involves this kind of, evaluation of anything that's not in SNOMED that's in your extension to see if it appeared.
Shaun, you do have a question online from Debbie. Yes. She's asking, do you use the daily build browser to check your content, or do you wait for the release?
The daily build browser from
SNOMED International.
From SNOMED International.
We have a daily build
no.
browser. No. Okay.
they wait for the release.
And I was wondering, because you were
That's an
talking,
interesting idea.
you were speaking about the heavy manual labor in creating the extension. I was wondering if you were utilizing the release validation framework, the RVF?
So when I mentioned the manual labor involved, initial manual labor involved in the creation of this content, that was because it was all in spreadsheets, right, essentially. So the work migrated to using a platform that automates a lot of it, helps a lot with a lot of that effort, authoring effort, and workflow related effort. 5 minutes. Yes.
Shaun, just to add on what James was saying, I'm John Snyder from the U.S. National Release Center. So when the requests come in, we review them and evaluate them, and if they conform to international editorial policy, we forward them on to international requests for processing. Those may get wrapped up in one of the monthly releases, at which point that SNOMED identifier is available for use. However, the US is constrained to publishing our US edition twice per year, once in March and once in September. So anything that is authored either in the international in those intervening months, as well as the US extension, will still go out as either the September or March release.
That's an important clarification,
You
right?
have no pre-release policy?
Define what you mean by a pre-release policy.
When you get a valid code, you give it to the user so they can go ahead and deploy it.
International does make the code available, as does the US extension, but it's a use at your own risk until it's validly published. It's the same policy that Link also has.
So that was a good conversation, and I was afraid I might kind of spend more time on that than I planned. but I'll go through. Yeah, 3 minutes. So 3 minutes for this last use case. And okay, so this was work done with CDC on pathogen codes. The pathogen codes, as I mentioned in the beginning, were used for reporting healthcare associated infections. Key thing here is, again, this was a spreadsheet. I'm going to jump ahead to start. So here's the content, right? Roughly 2,500 concepts. Well, actually, I should say 2,500 terms, right? Because it was not a concept-based content set. It was unique descriptions with manually created, meaningful mnemonic identifiers. So the work being done involved maintaining their own synonymy, maintaining their own codes. Those codes were meaningful codes. So when you're doing it manually in a spreadsheet and you have to make sure you're not duplicating codes, that can become quite a task. Those codes were assigned at the level of what we would call description in SNOMED, right? Not at the level. Now, the codes had kind of a schema that helped you roll up to a concept level code, but this was a heavy manual effort. So first step was to sort of, and I won't go into this diagram in detail, but the first step was to reconcile, take that content, turn it into a controlled medical vocabulary, right? So go in, identify things that are attributes, things that are terms, things that are concepts, and treat them as such, bring them into the environment. The next step was to map that content to SNOMED to see what the overlap was, right? And what we found is that all the concepts were already present in SNOMED. So they were already in SNOMED when we did the map. That made this an obvious candidate for a SNOMED value set. Rather than being a standalone code system, it became a SNOMED value set. And the immediate advantage was standard identifiers, a bunch of extra synonymy, and ontology that wasn't present in the code system before. It was just sort of a flat list of terms, right? And then, so SNOMED is essentially managing all that for this content set, and additional attribute information specific to the pathogen code sets are appended onto the SNOMED concepts. And so, in a nutshell, this was a tremendously more efficient process for them in the authoring and management. It gave them a higher value asset. It's, the work is still underway, and there are other opportunities for code sets like this at CDC. Yeah, I think, am I at time? I just want to acknowledge all the folks that, and these are several of the folks. There were more folks involved in this from APHL, Ricky, Jamie, Amy, and Christina, CDC, Sheila Abner, and Shuai Zhang, and at Datapult, Millie and Patina. So questions? we can go back to talking about.
We do
the-
have time for maybe one more question. If not, Shaun, I know we'll be out in the hall after this, and with that, that will conclude this session, and thank you so much, Shaun. If we can all give him a round of applause.
Thank you.